Borderlands 3 is now 2 years old, which feels weird. I could have sworn it came out in 2020, but that year was just a write-off. When it released, many fans, myself included, had plenty of issues with it. Poor story, boring characters and odd pacing, and the number one culprit for me was the slow menus even on the PS4 Pro. The game didn't run very well, making all these little bits add up to a 78 on Metacritic and a 5.9 user score. I remember playing Borderlands 1 for the first time all them years back in split screen on my brother's Xbox, and then went on to beat the game with every character and put over 200 hours in Borderlands 2 on Steam alone. I've played every iteration of Borderlands 2, and yes, that means VR and PS Vita. So to say that I'm a fan of this series is an understatement. I would happily put the 2012 action RPG in my top 10 games ever. So what rubbed me the wrong way with this third entry in the trilogy back when it released? Well, I thought the pacing was weird, I hated the menus, and the new characters were a complete mixed bag of quality. So in this 2021 re-review, how does it stack up? I'm going to break it down into multiple sections. Firstly, the gameplay. How does it feel to play? Is the loop satisfying? Secondly, story and characters. Is it as bad as I remember, or was I being too harsh? Thirdly, the areas and quest design. This was the main reason why I thought the pacing was a bit off. And finally, the DLC, mostly focusing on Season Pass 1. How do these packs stack up against the very strong showings in the previous games, and do they fix my issue with the base game? I'll then wrap it up into a nice little conclusion and decide whether or not I was too harsh on the game back in 2019. So sit back and enjoy my 2021 retrospective on Borderlands 3. Let's get this out of the way. From a moment-to-moment gameplay standpoint, Borderlands 3 is the strongest in the series, no ifs and or buts about it. Everything from the movement, gun feel, abilities, and counter design and overall fun factor is impeccable. And I think it should be commended for being this strong. From the get-go, guns feel weighty and we're introduced to the idea of alternate firing modes. This is something I was hoping would be more common for most guns, but it ends up being rather inconsequential. So it felt weird that this was one of the first things that the game teaches you. I noticed from the start that even the early encounters had plenty of action in them. Obviously it ramps up to 9,000 later in the game, but here's a comparison of early combat and late game combat. Both feel great, and being engaged from minute 1 left a hefty impression on me, and it never really lets up from there. The first 2 planets are well designed with a great introduction to the more explorative nature of the game, with side objectives like finding the claptraps and extra catch-a-ride parts, but more on those later. Each character now has 3 action skills to choose from rather than 1, meaning there is even more choice when creating a build. And so far I've played 2 of these characters and they're the strongest showing in the series. When the game was released I played as Flak because I always play hunters in RPGs when given a choice. His abilities were all related to his pets, having 3 pets to choose from if I recall correctly. For this playthrough however I went with the Siren Amara. I started with 1 ability but later moved on to her phase lock as it gave me some great crowd control for solo playthrough. Once I was at high level, the carnage on screen was breathtaking. I would have multiple enemies phase locked, crazy grenade mods that rained fire or homing skulls down on my enemies, all the while using some orange weapon that decimated enemies. When it comes to action RPGs, it's imperative that the game has a right level of chaos. Too much and it just becomes a jumbled mess, and too little and it becomes boring. Even the most hectic combat encounters never felt too much, and with the added power of the PS5 there was no noticeable frame drops. Now I only played Amara, but the 4 skill trees had completely different playstyles. My favourite was the phase lock tree, however I did mess around with a melee build that had my abilities attached to the melee kill skills. While it didn't feel as OP as my other build, it was a small change of playstyle that was welcome. Once again, there are plenty of overpowered builds and weapons that offer an insane power trip, and I fecking loved it. The loot system was arguably too rewarding. I know that sounds weird, but hear me out. From around level 1 to 40 I found a handful of oranges and they were powerful. After that though, the game began littering the screen with oranges, with multiple dropping in single play sessions, which was a first for the series. Playing the previous titles you would be lucky to have 10 oranges after 2 full playthroughs, and after reaching the level cap I almost had a full bank of oranges, and my whole loadout for the past 20 hours of gameplay was gold. There were a few standouts of completely unique weapons, but hands down my favourite was an ode to Doom 2016. It was a double barrel shotgun that one-shot most enemies and played the guitar riff every single time I shot it. The game is filled to the brim with unique weapons and the throwbacks to old weapons that fans of the series know and love. Now it lended well to the power trip, and it's a single player game, so balance doesn't really matter too much, but it rendered anything but an orange drop to be useless, meaning I spent a lot of time in the menus just selling purple, blue and uncommon weapons. I think Borderlands 3 benefits heavily from the PS5's power, and releasing it on PS4 and Xbox was a bad idea, whether that be down to bad programming or rushing the game out. The menus were an absolute slog on previous gen and it ground the pacing down to a snail's crawl. I dreaded every time I opened my menu on the PS4 Pro, but here on the PS5 they are responsive, which is a must considering how much time I spend combing through my inventory. Honestly, just for performance alone, I think the game is worth revisiting on current gen as it feels so much better to control. As for haptics, well, they're good, but nothing too spectacular. Each gun brand already felt unique in Borderlands, but the different haptics only amplify this feeling. Jacob's weapons with their single fire ability required a hard press of the trigger, while the charge up Malawan weapons almost added a spongy feeling to the trigger. They're a nice addition, but after 30 plus hours of the game constantly pressing R2, it can cause cramps. But on the plus side, my right index finger is swole. Back in 2019, I still believe this was the best Borderlands to play, and it holds up even to this day. And with the enhancement of the PS5, it's only better. However, it was mostly the other areas of the game that dragged it down. So let's move on to arguably the most controversial part of Borderlands 3, and that is the story and characters.
Let me do my thing.
Now, full spoilers ahead here. The story once again is about Vault Hunters teaming up with new and old characters to defeat the Calypso twins, a parody of social media influencers, only these are pure evil and possess siren abilities. They also created a cult-like following, but that's not too different from today's social media people. Anyway, they're looking for a great vault and to become gods. Of course, we're here to stop them. Teaming up with all the Vault Hunters from previous games to defeat them, and of course Claptrap is here, but his voice actor has changed, which is quite jarring, but Randy Pitchford did punch the original voice actor, so I don't blame him for leaving.
Anymore. That's because the only thing standing between this ship and space is my ass. My ass saved all your asses.
I don't think there is anything particularly wrong with this plot. It's similar to the other titles. Stop the evil bad guy from opening the vault. The characters from the original games are here in their full glory. Lilith is a badass, Brick and Mordecai are a great duo, Tiny Tina is as crazy as ever, and of course, Claptrap is a useless fecker, and I'm attached to this series, so I love these characters and they are as strong as they have ever been. Now, I don't think anyone had any issues with the old characters. It's the new characters where the issues arise. So Tyrene and Troy Calypso are extremely annoying, but I'd be confident in saying that was the goal of the developers. We all know of annoying influencers and they captured this perfectly. They're nowhere near as strong as Handsome Jack, but it's hard to live up to that. My main issue is that they're not in the game enough to make me care about them or hate them. I only have a minor distaste for them because of how annoying their personality is. The strongest new character is by far Wainwright Jacob, the CEO of the Jacob Corporation, a partner of Sir Hammerlock. I love their relationship and it gives even more personality to an already great character in Hammerlock. The first ever Vault Hunter, Typhon de Leon, the father of the Calypso twins, is here too, and you mostly encounter him through audio logs scattered throughout the world, and I love this writing, but once again I wish the game would include him a bit more. Once you find him and meet him in person, it feels like he's only in the game for an hour or two and then he's gone. Now it kinda stops there. After this, the rest of the characters are so unmemorable that I had to Google a list of them so I could talk about them. Ava is Maya's apprentice and is just a teenage problems personified. Look, her character isn't bad, but she's too plain for Borderlands. What happened to a teenager who loved explosions but had a messed up past, or a doctor who was not certified to carry out any of the procedures? On top of this, there's characters like Clay, who I could tell you practically nothing about, other than his voice acting is good. The great writing and funny dialogue is still here, but it's mostly delivered by existing characters rather than making the new characters memorable. The story itself isn't terrible, and the old characters do a lot to carry you through, however, Gearbox dropped the ball on the new characters. Spoiler alert, a lot of these issues are fixed in the DLC, but more on that later. Now this brings us to the quest and area design, so enjoy this rant. How did this game start so well, then absolutely shit the bed in the second half? Gearbox, you are doing so well. Just let me explain. You start the game on this familiar Pandora, fighting the Children of the Vault, with a mixture of mostly wide open and linear areas, giving a nice mixture of exploration and linear combat sections, which are my favourite parts of Borderlands. Then you land on Promethea, another good mixture of exploration and linear areas. Arguably leaning too much on the exploration, with the main city and the side area Electra City being quite open. But then the game pulls it back and gives you Athenas, a romp from A to B of non-stop combat, and it couldn't have come at a better time. It's like Gearbox knew exactly what they were doing here. Next you visit Eden 6, a swampy planet home to the Jacobs Corporation, and the introduction to Wainwright Jacob. And once again, the areas are quite large, rarely giving you a break from the excessive driving and constantly checking your map to make sure you're going the right way. Yes, the story on Eden 6 is great, but the areas are just so convoluted that I hated exploring them. Scattered throughout the open levels are side objectives like Hammerlock hunts, Claptraps to find, and Typhon the Leon logs, which were the only ones that interested me after a while. The Typhon logs gave you insight into his trials as a Vault Hunter, and I enjoyed his character. The other objectives were just random busy work that never felt rewarding, and this only continues on Necrotafeo. Once again, the story is good, but the area is too open and the pacing of Eden 6 and Necrotafeo are just so slow. To me, it felt like they just wanted to extend the length of the game, but ended up hurting it in the end. The game is certainly longer than previous titles, but I think it's to its detriment. Yes, Necrotafeo and Eden 6 had some linear romps, but it just was so worn out by the massive open areas that it became too much. And this brings me on to my biggest issue with the game, and that is the quest design. So the main quests are standard fare. Go to place X, carry out task Y, then move on to the next area. When all characters are involved, I enjoyed these, but once again, the poorly made newer characters made the dialogue heavy missions rather boring. Luckily, the cast is mostly returning characters, so this issue rarely reared its ugly head. However, the side quests are so hot and cold. Fans of the series know that Borderlands has some bonkers side quests, like a psycho who wants you to shoot him in the face, or Handsome Jack paying you to jump off a building. On top of this, there are plenty of references to pop culture mixed into these in the previous titles, like a mission dedicated to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in Borderlands 2. Some side quests are strong in the third entry with funny dialogue, plenty of action and good rewards, but a mix of overindulging in the dialogue and overcomplicated area design quickly dragged down on me, and I stopped doing most of these side quests just because I was fed up. The main issue is that there's plenty of downtime during missions. Some side quests could have you standing around for a few minutes listening to the dialogue before you can properly start it. Even when the dialogue is written well, this can be a slog. There was a coffee side quest that has a small bit of humour slagging so-called coffee addicts. Here the dialogue is between a coffee robot and Lorelei, one of the strongest new characters. While this has nothing different in the way of objectives, it's the dialogue that carries it. Even with some downtime, it's a well-made side quest. Others have boring characters spouting useless dialogue, so I just gave up. It's a shame because I'm sure I missed out on some great side quests, but for every good one there was 5 mediocre ones that had me banging my head off the desk. So you might think I'm pretty down on this game, but I did really enjoy my time with it. So does the DLC fix any of these issues I was talking about? It's a resounding yes for me. This is the strongest showing for a DLC pass in the whole series. Yes, Borderlands 1 had Dr. Ned's Zombie Island, and the sequel had Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep. But as a whole, the Borderlands 3 Season Pass is the strongest in the series. Every single one gives about 4 to 8 hours of gameplay with whole new areas, bosses, enemies and weapons. And guess what? There are very few wide open areas, instead opting for a more linear approach, which is to be expected for DLC, but it is also very welcome. I'll quickly break down the plot of each DLC, and then explain why all of them fix many of the issues I had with the base game. So we start with the first main pack, Moxie's heist on the Handsome Jackpot. Of course, they had to wedge Jack into the game, and why the feck not, he's a great villain. The premise of this added content is an outer space casino originally owned by Handsome Jack. Since he has died, however, there are people trapped in the casino due to the debt they racked up. Instantly, I was reminded of Bioshock, except in space and in a casino. The remaining customers, or prisoners, have splintered off into their own factions, and I was captivated from minute one. I think this is one of the strongest DLCs in the series to date. Firstly, there's more Handsome Jack, even if it's only pre-recorded messages, and the setting is amazing. And it also builds on an already strong character in Moxie. The second DLC pack is Guns, Love and Tentacle, a Lovecraftian tale of Sir Hammerlock and Wainwright Jacob's wedding. And once again, the setting is phenomenal. The townspeople are possessed by something which you soon discover is some crazy, tentacly cultist leader, and the atmosphere while exploring is equal parts intriguing as it is creepy. Typically you would expect to be saving a wedding from a crazy ex or someone getting cold feet, but instead you're attempting an exorcism on one of the grooms. The third and my least favourite DLC is the Bounty of Blood, set in an old western town where you must help defeat the local bandits. Now there is a narrator throughout this DLC which took me by surprise, but a lot of this pack is quite unmemorable. And last but not least, Psycho Krieg's fantastic Fuster Club. You peer into the mind of Krieg, uncovering his past and seeing his daily struggle with his normal mind and the psycho that we all know. And it's surprising how narratively deep this pack is. Now why do these packs fix many of my issues? Well, there's two reasons mainly. The areas are rather condensed, and even the largest areas like a Bounty of Blood or Blood, Guns and Tentacles aren't too large and are paced well with a lot of linear areas throughout. It felt like they looked at the strong opening of the base game and replicated it, mostly focusing on old characters like Jack, Moxie, Krieg, Maya and the relationship between Wainwright and Hammerlock. Having the extra character development behind Krieg was something I never knew I wanted, and learning about his past with Maya added extra weight to the original story, which was much needed. Moxie and Jack's relationship was always interesting, so fleshing that out even more was welcome too. And of course, Hammerlock and Wainwright, who I've mentioned a lot in this video, are as strong as they have been in the base game. And I think this heavy emphasis on previous characters bolsters the game's narrative immensely. Bounty of Blood is definitely the weakest, as I didn't like any of the characters in it. The narrator was cool, and yes, who doesn't love an old western? but I didn't care about the plot and beelined it so I could move on to the next DLC. Do I think any of these packs come close to Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep? Well, yeah, I actually do. Blood, Guns and Tentacles and Moxie's DLC have fantastic setting and amazing characters, so it's definitely in contention. As a season pass, I think it's the strongest that the series has to offer. Not because of the strength of any one pack, but the quality of them as a whole. The directors and designers could add a few little endgame content like raid bosses, an extra skill tree for each class, some missions and a new roguelike mode. Now I didn't really play much of these packs mainly because it's endgame content that I would only find fun with friends, of which I would have none that would put 40 hours into Borderlands with. So let's wrap this all up and answer one simple question. Is Borderlands 3 worth revisiting in 2021 on the next generation of consoles? Well, I believe so. You can get the Ultimate Edition on sale for $50 and the amount of content here is insane. Hands down, it is the best controlling game in the series and feck me do some of the guns feel amazing to shoot. While I still think the narrative falls flat and the new characters will be better off dead, if you have a love for the previous characters then there is still something to enjoy here. Should you buy the DLC if you already own the game? I would certainly say yes with Season Pass 1, because combined they offer some of the best content the franchise has ever seen. And on top of that, it fixes many of the issues I had with the base game. I still prefer Borderlands 2, but that is because of nostalgia and the stronger narrative. And one question I want to ask myself, am I glad I went back to this game in 2021? And the answer to that is, of course. I think I was slightly too harsh on the game 2 years ago. There is plenty of fun to be had, and while the narrative was weaker than 2, it's still passable. The game itself feels great to control, and it's certainly worth playing. Well, that was my longest video I have ever made. This is my first type of video in this style, so please leave feedback on what I did right and what I did wrong, so next month's video can be even better. I really appreciate your watching. And while you're here, I would love if you shared the video and gave it a thumbs up, as this was a long time in the making. As for now, leave any other games you would like me to cover in the comment section below. Don't forget to subscribe and join the Discord too, and I'll see you all next time.